Hey,
Boker Tov.
Boker Tov. Oh, hello, Yehuda.
Hi, Rabbi.
Um, okay, good to see everyone. Um, okay, so the Gemara that we learned, we really went over already. It was about the calculation of the 11 amos, the 11 cubits of the aravos. These are very long aravos. That's like a 20 feet approximately aravos that they would place on the by the mizbeach, and the Gemara said that it must be that they would put them on the yesod and not on the ground. The yesod was the base of the mizbeach, not on the ground of the mizbeach, because if you calculate it, it ends up that 11 amos wouldn't be long enough. You would need it to be even more. It would need to be a little longer in order to um, fulfill the official policy or the rule that the ravos are supposed to be hanging over, hovering over the mizbeach, um, and so the Gemara calculated. Okay, so it's 11 amos. Mizbeach is 9 amos. It's on a slant. It needs to hover over, so it's got to get higher in order to bend over. Ultimately, 9 amos of the mizbeach plus two is uh, is 11, but you really would need extra because of the slant, and therefore we're going to remove one of the amos, and then you have extra. How do you remove one of the amos? Basically, put it on the yesod, put it on the base instead of on the ground. So even though Mizbeach is 9 amos, besides for the corners, we're not talking about the corners, but besides for the corners, Mizbeach itself is 9 amos, but we're going to basically use 8 of the amos, and ultimately that will cover our need for the aravos, the willows, to bend over the Mizbeach. The uh, the Gemara then said that what's the pasuk for this? And the pasuk the Gemara says is Isru Chag Ba'avoisim Ad Karnes Hamizbeach. It's a pasuk we say in Hallel. Isru Chag Ba'avoisim Ad Karnes Hamizbeach. And as we see, the Gemara uses it for many other things, many ideas. It's many insights into doing certain things are considered as if you built the mizbeach, and so here the Gemara is using this pasuk to say that you use these branches and they're supposed to go ad karnes hamizbeach, and the Gemara understands that they should be nice and long. Now you see that it's supposed to go above the mizbeach. And the commentaries do talk about how exactly do you see that from the pasuk. In other words, the simple way of reading these type of Agarata Gemaras are just, uh, well, you see in the pasuk talks about it reaches the horn, the corners. Okay, it's good enough. But if you really want to dig deeper into it, how exactly do you see it from that pasuk? Um, how do you know that it has to go over the mizbeach? How high? So the the understanding seems to be that the pasuk says ad karnes hamizbeach. It should say bikarnes hamizbeach. But the word ad seems to be a little extra because so you could learn that it means that it would seem that it's connected to that teaching. Again, the commentaries talk about it in the next Gemara regarding it's as if you built the mizbeach and you brought a korban on it, and seemingly you could say here as well that it's emphasizing that they're tall. They go all the way to the karnais, to the corners. But it could just say it goes big karnais hamizbeach up to the corners. When it says ad karnais hamizbeach, maybe it implies more that it's ad viad bechlal. It goes even over the corners, or maybe something along those lines. Again, I'm trying to take what the commentaries say on the next Gemara and sort of borrow it and use it over here uh, exactly to learn to understand what the proof is. I mean, just to say that they're big, ad karnes hamizbech. In other words, I guess you could just learn the Gemara simply and say that um, if you want to stand up aravais by the mizbeach, who says they have to reach the top? They could just be placed on the side. So the pasuk says, "Ad kindness hamizbech," they got to reach the top. So in other words, they're not really proving that they have to go over the top and over the corner, above. We're just saying that they should be they're supposed to reach the top of it. So I guess you could just learn it that way, that they're supposed to reach the top. And as we saw yesterday, and David had mentioned it. It's one of the commentaries. The Aruch Lener, I think, says what David had quoted. David mentioned that that what happens when they don't have that size. I mean, that's very large aravis. Most bushes of aravis do not grow that long. So what do you do when you don't have that size? So first of all, the Rambam doesn't even bring that. Doesn't even bring this concept of 11 amos. So the Aruch Lener says it's because it's not a necessity to be that large. If you have smaller, you place it on different parts of the mizbeach. On the soive area, you could put it. You could place it in areas where it'll reach the top of the mizbeach, even though it's not starting off on the bottom. The Aruch Lener says something interesting. If you have bigger than the 11 amos, you could actually start it on the floor. The reason they would start it on the yesoid, on the base, is because it was rare to have bigger than 11. That was like the maximum they found. That was generally the maximum. If you had bigger, you didn't have to place it on the yesoid. You could start it on the ground. But it seems like what you see in the pasuk, and this is why I'm bringing this, that the pasuk seems to be emphasizing that the most important part of the aravos is that it should reach on the top part of the mizbeach, ad karnes hamizbeach. The bottom part doesn't seem to be such a necessity. It's the ad karnes hamizbeach. That's what we want. That it should reach the upper part of the mizbeach. So if you only have small ones, put it on the upper part. I think that's how the Aruch Lener at least is learning. If you have smaller ones, put it on the upper part. Let it reach the karnes hamizbeach. If you don't have if you don't have big enough, which side, where should you put it? Should you put it on the ground part, on the side, on the side? Put it on the higher part. Let it reach ad karnes hamizbeach. You didn't start it at the bottom, but the top part is more of the ceremony of the aravos. Okay. Anyway, that was the Gemara from yesterday. And then the Gemara mentioned about if you take the lulav and the hadas, which is the
myrtle.
The what?
Myrtle.
Myrtle. Thank you. The myrtle. The pasuk, if you do it properly, it's considered as if you built the mizbeach and brought a carbon on it. And here it's ad karnes hamizbeach. It's Isru Chag ba'avosim ad karnes hamizbeach. Again, the same pasuk, but it's learning that it's Isru Chag. That here we're translating it to mean Isru tie together the bundle of the lulav with the hadas that's avosim, with the hadas that's braided. And this was a little question that was bothering me, at least. Why are we not emphasizing the aravos? Why are we emphasizing why is the pasuk? We're learning it from the pasuk about it's considered as if you brought the karnais, you built the mizbeach, why aren't we talking about the Aravis also? That's part of it, you know. But it seems my thought is that it's that the Aravis were very easy to have. In fact, I think if I remember correctly, we had a discussion about Aravis being so cheap, they might be less than a Shava Pruta. And if they're less than a Shava Pruta, can you be considered that you own it? Is it considered yours? I believe we had such a discussion a while back. So what that means is that our rabbis were easy to find. Everyone had our rabbis. Maybe you didn't have 11 Amma rabbis, but you had our rabbis. You always, to have our rabbis was no big deal. But the hadassim and the myrtle and the lulav, that was a problem. I remember when I went to Australia one year for Sukkah. I was there for Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. So I remember we were in Brisbane, Australia. Uh, they shipped us from Melbourne. They shipped us the lulavim and esrogim. The problem was that they didn't ship it in an air conditioned truck. So when we got the aravais, they were unusable. There were no leaves. They all fell off right away. We took them out. So, but we were able to get our ravais locally. Locally, we were able to find our ravais. Hadassim, where do you get hadassim from? You have to get them from Israel. Myrtle, the willows you find all over the place. We found ravais, but anyway, so so maybe that's why it emphasizes this. This is that was it's not what wasn't easy always to get. In fact, in Europe, they always used to struggle to have someone who's traveling. Could they bring back the arba minim? It was not easy in Europe to get the arba minim. Maybe Morocco you had Sreigim, but what about the hadassim and lovim, So anyway, bottom. I think now we get lulavim from Egypt. I think that's where most of the lulavim today come from. But anyway, so this is the pasuk that it says Israchag ba'avosim tayit ad karnis hamizbech. As if you built a mizbeach, as if you put the blood on the mizbeach, and because it says again here is where the commentaries mention this idea that it says ad karnes hamizbeach, it doesn't say big karnes, so it's as if you built from the mizbeach from the bottom all the way up to the corners of the mizbeach, and that's why it says ad karnes hamizbeach. So here it emphasizes the building of the mizbeach as if you built it, and it's as if you brought a carbon as well on the mizbeach. They also mention that the corners, most of the carbonis, the blood was not sprinkled on the corners. Carbon chatas was on the corners, but the other carbonis, it was below the chut hasikra. Let me mute it in here. Oh. It was below the chut hasikra, below that red mark, which was in the middle of the mizbeach. So they would throw the blood, they would sprinkle the blood, the kayanim, and it would be most of the karbanas are shtayim shehin arba, two that are four. They would put it at the two corners, which would end up spritzing on the corner on both sides on one side, and then the opposite corner, the diagonal corner on the other two corners, which covered the other two sides of the mizbeach. So the corners were normally not used for the blood, except for a carbon chatas, except for a sin offering. And when they inaugurated the mizbeach, then they put they sprinkled on the corners of the mizbeach. It says v'lakachta midam hapor v'nasata al karnes hamizbeach. So what it's emphasizing is that the fact that it uses the term the corners of the Mizbeach, we see it's talking about that it's as if you built it, not just brought a carbon, but it's even as if you built it, as if you inaugurated it. That's why it emphasizes the corner. So we have two pshatim, really, two interpretations why, how we're understanding that it's considered that it's as if you built it, because it says either ad or because it says karnos. Either one. Number one, ad karnos amizbeach, if you built it all the way up to the corners, and it could have said big karnos. And the other thing is, why is it even talking about the corners? If it's just about bringing a carbon, it's as if you brought a sacrifice. You don't need the corners. Uh, you sprinkle it on the sides. So it must be, it says until the corners, as if you inaugurated them, as if you built it and inaugurated it, so to speak. Just like by the inauguration, they did the corners. Okay, then came the next Gemara, and the next Gemara was about Isru Chag. This is an interesting halacha, a nice halacha. A lot of people don't, they celebrate, so to speak, on Isru Chag, and this is the source. In Isru Chag, you're supposed to celebrate to some extent, achila, shia, eating something nice and drinking. Isru Chag, I mean, there's two meanings over here, as I mentioned yesterday. One is that it's referring to the actual Yom Tov, but the other one, what we call Isru Chag, is the day after Yom Tov. So again, these are two understandings of the this halacha of either rejoicing with food and drink, and on the Yom Tov, or on the day after is also part of sort of like escorting the holiday, making it special, showing that the holiday was special. Even the day after, we give it a little honor. We give it some honor. Isru Chag ba'avoisim. Avoisim means fattened. In the olden days, nowadays, of course, everyone's against fat, trans fats and the saturated fats and meat, and people are all nervous of all these things. But in the olden days, that was like the best meat, was the fattest, the avoisim, the fat meat. That was what that meat you sold. Nowadays, you pay more for the when they cut off the fat, you have to pay more for it. The hamburger meat that they buy is the full of all the fats that you can get cheap. But if you want it more healthier, they remove the fat and you pay a higher price for it. In the olden days, it was the opposite. The avoisim, the fat ones, that was the shmena. That was considered like the special thing for Yontiv. So Isru Chag ba'avoisim, tie or attached to the holiday with special foods, with avoisim, fattened foods, until it's as if you built the mizbeach. Again, the same idea that it says at karnes hamizbeach. It's as if you built the mizbeach and you brought a carbon. You brought a carbon on it. Okay. And then the Gemara said about derech gidi lasan. Now, derech gidi lasan is an interesting concept, that the mitzvahs are supposed to be done on the way that they grow. Now, we know this halacha because many people, when they recite the bracha on the lulav, they turn it upside down. Why do they do that? They turn it upside down because the way to do a mitzvah is you say a bracha first, and then you do the mitzvah. Now, if you take the lulav and esrog and you put the esrog right side up, the top side up, what's going to happen is you did the mitzvah before you said the bracha. So what do? Turn it upside down, then say the bracha. And then after you finish the bracha, then you do the mitzvah. It's a very well-known thing that we're supposed to say the bracha generally before the mitzvah. You don't do the mitzvah first, like when you put tefillin on. Before you tie it, you do the bracha, and then you tie it. Then you tie the tefillin, then you tighten the tefillin. So this is the concept over here, that taking the arba minim, they're supposed to be done in a way that's the way it grows. And it becomes a little tricky because people think of an esrog. When you look on an esrog tree, the esrog, actually, the pitum, often you will see on the bottom, and the ukits, which is the bottom of the esrog, on the top. So you might say, oh, that's the way it grows. It grows the opposite way. But the answer is no, that's just because it gets heavy and it falls down. Really, on an esrog tree, the pitum is on the top. Derech gedilasa, on the way it grows. Now, the halacha is that you actually do not fulfill the mitzvah if you do it the wrong way. It has to be done this way. If you did it the other way, lo yotza, you did not fulfill the mitzvah. That's quite a surprising. You took the little of an esrog. I took all four. Nope, you didn't do the mitzvah. This is you didn't fulfill the mitzvah. It goes to that extent. Now, the discussion mentioned in the Paiskim is, so what about if you live in Australia? So maybe you might have to do everything upside down then, because you're on the bottom of the globe, and maybe you should be taking all the species upside down, because that's the way they grow. In other words, you're standing on the lower side of the globe, and so if you want to do the mitzvah properly, the way it grows is upwards. So you would have to. You're facing downward. Your head is towards the ground, because you're on the lower half of the globe, and so therefore you might think that maybe. So this is a question mentioned in the Bikura Yaakov. It says. Could you fulfill the mitzvah when you're in these when you're in the Chatzi Kadra Tachtoin? Yeah, on the lower side of the globe, how do you fulfill the mitzvah?
That's not a question, I hope.
He talks about it. He says, obviously, that that's the way it grows there. This is the way it grows there. But it is mentioned. But what a bigger shaila that's really asked is, what about the walls of the sukkah? Do they need to be placed the way they grow? And even bigger than that is the shaila of putting the schach. We don't put schach on our sukkah the way it grows. We put it on the side. The schach that we put on the sukkah, it goes on the side. So regarding the walls of the sukkah, the understanding is that the walls of the sukkah don't have to be from things that grow from the ground. So you could say that that's a reason that that it's not a problem, because who says you even need to have something that grows? If you need to have something that grows, then it has to be done in the way it grows from the ground. But if the walls of the sukkah don't need to be from wood, from things that grow, so then you wouldn't need this whole halacha of it has to, if you use wood, that it should be from the way it grows. So that's one way of understanding it. But there are poskim that say that the walls should be there. I mean, it's brought. The Thur brings such a concept that some say that it should be from the way it grows. We don't follow that, obviously. But the question is the schach. What about the schach? How does that work? The schach we put on, sideways. So anyway, the Shibbolei Aleket brings down about this B'Shem Rabbeinu Kleinimus, about the walls of the sukkah. But he says it would seem that that's a mitzvah min hamuvchar. Maybe it might be ideal to have the wood, facing up instead of having boards going from side to side. It seems like that might be a mitzvah min hamuvchar. The Thur brings the machlekes haposkim. Now, regarding the schach, that seems to be a shaila. So there is one way of answering it that that it's if it's on the side, it's not a problem. It's when it's upside down that's the problem. That when something is upside down, that would be an issue of not having it the way it grows. But if it's just on the side, that would be okay. The other issue that the commentaries say is that who says this applies to all mitzvahs? Maybe it only applies to certain mitzvahs. In other words, think about it. The ark, the shulchan, the table, the mizbeach, were those built in the way they grew? Doesn't say that. So maybe it's only a special law in certain cases. How does it work? Also, we learn about the Metzora, this week's parsha. Did they have to hold the Azov and the Eitz Erez? Was that all in a way of the hyssop and the cedar wood? Was that all derech the lasan? How does does it say that it has to be that way? So this is an interesting halacha about that it mentions regarding the lulav, that it has to be in the yesrog, it has to be derech the lasan. To what extent do we take that to other mitzvahs? What about besamim? What about the besamim? When you use some type of herbs for your besamim, you use some type of flowers, smell, different things. I know Sephardic people have some type of great smelling type of branches that they use for besamim. Does that have to be derech gedi lasan? Are you supposed? Does that have to be held in the way it grows? Or is it kosher any direction? So that's another thing that is mentioned in the poskim. Like, how far do we take it? Should the besamim be that way, that you're supposed to do it in the way it grows? Now, the other question is, what's the source? What is the source of this Gemara? So it says that you only yoitze ela derech gedi lasan, and I guess that's how the Rambam knows that it has to be this way. The wording, if you look at the wording, it says einay yoitze, ein adam yoitze bahen ela derech gedi lasan. You're not fulfilling it only if you do it this way. Basically, from that wording, it implies that it has to be this way, and if not, you do not fulfill the mitzvah. Again, to say this applies to all mitzvahs is hard to say, because we don't find it brought in Shulchan Aruch about the other mitzvahs, even though the poskim talk about the other mitzvahs. But even though it does mention in the Thur about the walls of the sukkah, that there are such opinions, but doesn't seem that that's for sure it's not the accepted halacha. No one is careful on the walls of their sukkah that it should grow, that they have to be facing upward, and you can't have it facing downward. Many people use wooden lattice. It's facing on they're not upward. You could build it however you want. But the Gemara brings a proof. It says atze shitim oimdim. Where does it say atze shitim oimdim? It talks about the Mishkan. You should make the krushim for the Mishkan atze shitim oimdim. And it doesn't say you should have the crushim oimdim. It says atze shitim oimdim. So the understanding is, you know what? It has to be the way it grew. No, it's not just that I want you to make the Mishkan from the crushim, standing crushim, but it's that it's atze shitim. It's shitim wood, acacia wood that's standing. In other words, the way it grew, that's how you should have it. So it's like teaching you a halacha. At least that's the way the Meiri understands the source of by the Mishkan, that it's teaching you a general law that other things as well should be the way it grew, not just telling you that the Mishkan should be this way, but it's emphasizing ati shitim. It's the inyan of the way it grows. That's how it has to be standing. You have to have them standing up. The Maharsha says oimdim is extra. He has another way of understanding it because you would know that it has to be standing just because it would never be able to hold itself if it was lived. They were, because you need to, if you have these adonim, these sockets on the bottom, if you have sockets, for sure the wood is standing up. So why does it say oimdim? So it's teaching you that you're supposed to have things the way they grow. That's the understanding. Now the question is, how do you know to apply that to the how do you know to apply that to the lulav and esrog? If you want to apply it to every mitzvah, fine, but we don't find that's the case. Now, it does it deserves more research. To what extent, how far do we take this halacha gedilasan? But the Bach says about the schach that if it's not upside down, it's kosher. The question is, does everyone agree with that? Because what would happen if you took your lulav and esrog and one of them was, and the esrog was on its side? This is a halachic question. Did you fulfill the mitzvah? If the esrog was on its side, or the lulav, it might be easier for someone to carry it, to hold it. He held it on the side. It was lying down, just lifted it up. Did he fulfill the mitzvah? He didn't do it the opposite way. He didn't do it upside down. He did it. He did it in the way that it. He did it in the way that it. Not the way that it grew, but not the opposite of it. So if that's good enough, that would mean that according to halacha, you could do the lulav and esrog that way. You could shake it that way. Anyway, so these are discussions based on this Gemara. We're going to now start Amar Chizkiya, Amar Yirmiyah. Amar Chizkiya, Amar Chizkiya, Amar Yirmiyah. Where are we? Amar Chizkiya. I'm sorry. Amar Chizkiya. It's about 8 lines from the top of the page. 45b. 45b. Okay. Let's see. Avram. Oh, okay. Let me just see. No, I don't. Okay. 45b, 8 lines from the top of the page. Amar Chizkiya, Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Yochai. Chizkiya says the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah and the name of Rabbi ben Yochai. Call the mitzvahs kula and all the mitzvahs. And it's interesting that he adds that these words. He says, "Kol mitzvahs kula," all the mitzvahs, all of them. Not just the Mishkan. Person doesn't fulfill them unless he does them, he uses them in the way that they grow. It means the bottom is on the bottom and the top is on the top. Shenemar, as it says by the Mishkan, that it should be the wood, shitim wood, that's standing. And again, we had 2 understandings of how you see that from the pasuk, that the Mishkan is emphasizing the fact that it's the way it grows, and because otherwise, either the fact that atze shitim, it could just say crushim, or it doesn't have to say oimdim. It's oimdim. The bottom line is, you see that it has to be derech the lasan, that the emphasis is that it's the way That's the way it grows. Yes, Jeffrey,
But that pasuk has nothing to do whatsoever with
with lulav and esrog.
no, it's just from the Mishkan.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting how the Gemara seems to be connecting a lot of things with the lulav and esrog with the Mishkan, with the kindness hamizbeach, that it's as if you brought a korban. This Gemara does touch on the fact that the lulav and esrog, the arba minim, are all about being maratza. We once had a discussion about this a while back, that the arba minim are ways of appeasing Hashem, begging Hashem, and that's why, according to the Ritva, he says there's the halacha about you have a halacha about mitzvah b'avera only by cases that are mitzvahs shabayim laratzos, mitzvahs that are there to beg Hashem for things, asking Hashem for things. So it's connected in a certain sense. It's like a korban that it's that these in fact, what did we have? We had Sukkah is connected to the is what we had it in Chagiga, I think. Sukkah. It said Sukkah is let's say over there. It said Sukkah is like Kodesh, is considered holy. That it has an element of the like of the Mishkan to the Sukkah. Here we're talking about of course the lulav and esrog, but we're saying that it's connected. It's similar to the Mishkan. And the Mishkan was about the Gilui of the Shechina and being able to being able to have access, to be meratzah, to have korbanos, to atone. So I guess you could connect these ideas, that it's connected. I mean, it's connected to the previous Gemara that ad karnes hamizbeach, esuchad ba'avoizim ad karnes hamizbeach, and maybe based on that, you could say maybe it's a continuation that the Gemara. I guess that's an interesting thought that the Gemara before talked about the lulav and esrog, lulav and hadassim being similar to building the Mishkan, building the Mizbeach. And then comes the next Gemara and says, that the lulav and esrog and hadassim and haravet, it's all about the Mizbeach and it's about the considered like you built the Mizbeach. Yeah, that's the idea that the same halachas of the Mizbeach also apply. The same halachas of the Mishkan would also apply. That it has to be derech k'di lasan, has to be in the way that that it grows. That just in other words, like that's almost like the comparison, and maybe it's basing it on that. That before we talked about the lulav and the hadassim, that they have to be that they're similar to the Mizbeach. And then it says, and there's a law by the Mishkan that it had to be atishita b'imdim. So here also that law would apply. That's what it seems like. Maybe it's a continuation. Anyway, it might. I guess the problem is the problem with that is was the Mizbeach really. Did the Mizbeach, was it really Atzei Maimdim? Was the Mizbeach really that way? I mean, the Mizbeach was made out of wood.
Right. On the Mizbeach it says Nevuv Luchos.
So I guess you would say, but the question is the top one, the top one, well, I mean, I guess it's possible. It was right. It was
it's covered with metal. It's covered with
It was covered with copper, but the thing is, derech. If we're learning that it's similar to the Mishkan, and the Gemara is understanding that would be one of the similarities. Now, one of the problems with learning this way is what I mean. It's a general question. What does he mean? Kol hamitzvahs kulon. Why is he adding that sentence? Kol hamitzvahs kulon is ein adam yetz ben ala derech k'di lasan. Really? How many mitzvah? Every mitzvah.
Not like that, but we have the big mitzvah of the Sukkah, and we're concerned about making the roof of the Sukkah, and nothing is going to be standing up there. It's all flat. So if you wanted to make a comparison,
I I'm starting to think that the mitzvahs that have to do with action, maybe those would be this derech gedilasan. In other words, when if it's a mitzvah of building, mitzvah of taking the lulav, maybe that's what it means. All the mitzvahs that you're doing, not a mitzvah that's just there. The build, if it's an action mitzvah that you're doing with it, that has to be derech gedilasan. Maybe, in other words, what I'm trying to figure out is how you could say kol ha-mitzvahs kulon is not really all mitzvahs. But if you say that the mitzvahs, all mitzvahs that are, that are all commandments that you're doing, so you're taking the lulav. Taking the lulav has to be derech gedilasan. These are any mitzvah that involves an act of taking, building the Mishkan. Okay, building the Mishkan. I mean, there the pasuk says it, but he says that you could learn from there all mitzvahs kulon, that when you're doing something, you do it with like smelling besamim is not an action mitzvah. You could go to the besamim and fulfill the mitzvah. But shaking the lulav and taking the lulav, maybe that is what it means, that this is a commandment that you have to do with an item. That has to be, the walls of a sukkah just could be built on their own. You don't need to build it. There's no mitzvah, it's a discussion in Tractate Makos. Is it a mitzvah to building the sukkah over there? No, there's a little hint to it.
But this is a section that
build it, but it's not. What?
This parak is lulav and arava. So all of these are what you have to hold in the correct direction. We start with the S-stroke upside down, and many people had that custom, and then you make sure that you turn it up.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned that. The question is how to connect it to. Do you connect this with other mitzvahs? And
so when he says kulon, it seems to me only he's referring to lulav and arava.
Right. In other words, because we see all the other mitzvahs, it doesn't seem to mention such a halacha. In fact, they argue when they say sukkah doesn't. Okay, there is an opinion that says sukkah needs to be, but the common accepted halacha is you don't need a sukkah to be that way. So that you can say, well, building a sukkah maybe is not a mitzvah. If you have a sukkah built, you don't need to build one. It's not the mitzvah is not the building of the sukkah; it's dwelling in the sukkah. Then you could say these are, maybe you could exclude a lot of the mitzvahs from this obligation. And as I mentioned, maybe the summum you could say is different, that it doesn't need to be, that you don't need to do an action there. It's the mitzvah. It's an inyan of smelling. It's not an inyan of holding and waving and doing anything with. So all the mitzvahs that you're doing something with, that's supposed to be derech gedilasan, the way it grows. And that would be the tilas lulav and the hadas arava and esrog. Yeah, let's see Rashi over here. Rashi says, kol ha-mitzvahs. What does Rashi say? Like the karshei ha-mishkan, amudim, lulav, hadas, v'arava. The Rashi says, like the karshei ha-mishkan. Now, the karshei ha-mishkan, I guess you could say, was a constant mitzvah to build. They constantly were building it. The amudim, the lulav, the hadas, and arava. They were taking it down and building it. That was the, but the actual, I don't know. The question is the mizbeach. They didn't take it apart. They would just put it up.
Correct. They even said that the flame was not out.
Never went out. Right. It stayed on it.
Like a bowl on top of it. It was a vessel on top of it.
So maybe you could say that wasn't like a part of it. Wasn't an action. Wasn't the building of it. Wasn't It wasn't constantly being put together. This was constantly being put together.
Yeah, but you would think that they would make an if you once you make an analogy with the Kroshim, then why not make an analogy with the Rios? I mean, right? You have also all around they have to hang them, right? And they never compared that with the Sukkah.
Well, what would you say about the Urias? The Urias, you're talking about the skins or the wool?
The textiles.
The wool. Wool. What would mean derech dilasan? There's no such thing. No, it says something grows. You can't have derech dilasan, so there's no need to mention anything. You can't have wool. It grows on all parts, sides of the animal. There's up and down and side, and the wool grows. So I don't know. That would be that would not be an example that would be part of this. But the
other understanding that I saw about this pasuk, the same pasuk, right? The Kroshim Omdim, was that when they came to put it up, it was so heavy that it was a very hard job that they stood up by themselves. That the Kroshim stood up by themselves. That I saw about this pasuk, but I never saw a comparison with something else. So, and I remember they made it the generality also earlier on. The generality was that over Asir son, right? Just parallel to this is the generality. They said that when you say a bracha, it should be over Asir son, just before you do the action. So it seems like every once in a while they would like to make a generality. They want to make a general rule, but it's only by inference.
Okay. I mean, anyway, it's an interesting thought that maybe could be developed if that's the way. Why does Rashi specifically pick these cases? Maybe there's something to it. Maybe there's something to the fact that these are all action mitzvahs, even though you're mentioning that they were put on their own, that the Kroshim were put on their own. But according to the simple reading of the Torah, it was a mitzvah to constantly build the Mishkan. That would be a case where it's supposed to be derech dilasan. Okay, let's continue. Tanenami hachi. We also have a brisa ati shitim oimdim, that the woods of the shitim would stand shemdim derech dilasan. They had to be standing in the way that they grew. Davar acher. Another interpretation, that the Kroshim, which are the beams, they held up the cover. They held up they were covered with gold, these beams. So what held the gold to what made it attached? So it was the wood is mimed. It supported the plate, the gold plate. The gold plate didn't just stand on its own. It says Vesa Kroshim Titzape Zohov, and the plates of gold that were and Rashi says the tzipoy of zahav kavua bahen. How did they attach it? They screwed in golden nails by masmeros shel zav, or golden nails. They attached it to the Atze Shitim. So Atze Shitim Aimde means not only did it stand, it was maimed, it supported the covering, the golden plate. Then it says Davar Acher Aimdim Shematimer Abad Sivram Abatel Sikuyam, that Atze Shitim Aimdim, that they're standing even now. Maybe you're going to think that when the oil moyed, when the Mishkan was hidden, and they built the Beis Hamikdash, so you're going to think that maybe Abad Sivram, the hope was lost. Batal sikuyan, and our tikva, our expectation that's going to return is finished. It's not going to happen, and our vision of our waiting is not going to happen. Batal sikuyam, our waiting is not going to happen. Talmud Leimer Atishita Maimdim, they're still there. The Atishita Maimdim Shem Leilam Al Me'al Lamim. Amar Chizkiah, and Chizkiah says, "Am Rabbi Yom Yom Shem Ben Yochai Yochel Nein of Deres Kolam Kulay Min Adin Miyam Shabar Nevresi Ebadat." I can exempt the whole world from judgment from the day that I was created until now, and because of my merit, I could handle all the sins from when I was created until now. The ilmale Elazar b'ni ime, and if Elazar b'ni would be with me, we could even exempt the whole world from the day the world was created until now, because of our merit. The ilmale Yosam ben Uziyahu, we mentioned this in a chapter in the Book of Kings 2, where it talked about Yosam, the son. If Yosam, the son of Uziyahu, if he was a righteous, very righteous king, Yosam, and if he would have been with us, it would be from the beginning the world was created until the end of time. We could have exempted the entire world till the end of days. It says Yosem was one of the most humble of all the kings, and we mentioned in Malachim that he would always quote his father as if his father was the source of every halacha that he said. He would always say it in the name of his father. He never considered himself king, even though his father had leprosy, and his father wasn't officially the king, but he would always say, no, my father's the king, I'm just like substitute. And he refused to take the crown from his father until his father passed away. And the pasuk says, "Ben Yechabedov," a son honors his father. It says this refers to him, and so it's basically this concept over here. Rashi brings this this whole thing. It was a tzaddik, he was an onav, and no, so that's the statement of Reb Shimon ben Yochai. The question is, why didn't Reb Shimon ben Yochai say, okay, so I'll exempt everyone? You know, why did he do it? You could have done it. Shkayach, let's see, do it. But
went into the cave.
The question,
He went into the cave instead.
I think because of the cave, he could have exempted them. That's probably what gave him the merit, So that's the question. Why didn't he exempt everyone? So the understanding is the Eibishter didn't want. No, they really could have, but Hashem didn't want. He wanted them to, he didn't want them to lose their merit, and just because of sinners, and so this is that's a very powerful idea that Shimon ben Yochai says, that I could have exempted everyone from the din, from din. Anyway, all right, now comes Vamra Chizkiah. Chizkiah says, I'm Rabbi Yirmiyah, Mishum ben Yochai. I saw Bnei Aliyah, special people, elevated, exalted people, Hein Mu'atin, and there's a small amount. Im Elef, if there's 1,000 of them, Hein Ani Ubanai Hein, Im Elef Hein, excuse me. If there's 1,000 of them, Ani Uvani Mehen, me and my son are with them. Im Meyahem, if there's 100, Ani Uvani Mehen, I and my son are also
including them.
Are part of them. Im shnayim heim, if there's two, ani uvnei heim. I and my son are the two. So this is basically, Rav Shimon ben Yochai mentioning the greatness, the high level that he reached through his, I guess through the suffering that he went through. And it does sound like he's not being humble. It sounds a little arrogant. Why he's saying such a thing? Well, what is his purpose in mentioning this? But what it seems that why would he be saying this? So, not to say that it's arrogance. That's not necessarily a question, because you could say that arrogance is when you here he's saying who he is. I know where I stand. He knows his level. Arrogance could be when you make yourself bigger than you are, or that you know your level and you are claiming that that it's all you reach this level all because of your greatness, and no one else could ever reach this type of level. That would be arrogance. That I made myself. Here he's not saying that necessarily. He's just saying that I'm on this level. I've reached a level that I'm one of the B'nai Aliyah.
So you said before.
My talent, I might be. It could be that I was just brought up this way, and it was easy for me to get to. He's not saying that I deserve what I have. I'm the one who deserves it, and no one else can could reach this. No, maybe you could have gotten higher. I happen to have merited this for maybe not because of myself, but because just my personality allowed me to reach this. But we are one of. But the question is, what does he really emphasize? Why is he saying this? And also, what was he saying before that I could have exempt the whole? What is his purpose in mentioning this? That I could exempt the whole world from din, miyom shenevresi, until now. Why would he say that?
Well, the only thing that I see the connection is that if we're still talking about Hoshana Rabbah, I mean, it's a little confusing. Sometimes you think talking about the ceremony of Arava every day, but generally I think they're talking about the seventh day. And so we consider that Hoshana Rabbah also from point of view is
mystical, a mystical day.
And it's like Yom Kippur.
Definitely a mystical day. People don't even understand the value of Hoshana Rabbah. Most people don't understand. Almost everyone doesn't know the uniqueness of Hoshana Rabbah. It's a very hidden. It's a hidden mirror, a hidden holiday. And so, what are you saying that maybe Rashbi also? How does that connect to Rashbi? This greatness.
So, well, we're talking. This whole section, all these analogies are in the section about the Arava. Okay, and placing the trees or whatever, the branches on the side of the Mizbeach, whatever. And it's all symbolic. It's not in the Torah, so it's not the same level of let's say of palpable things to do. These are things that are they said some said from the Nevi'im, and you have to look for the extra letters to figure out the ceremony of the water. So the judgment on water is also this time of year. But it's another level of the holiday that's different from the Sukkah itself, and from how many meals you have to eat in the Sukkah, and what is kosher to make a Sukkah. So it's an expansion on that. I was very surprised the first time that I read the section that was so different from Parak 1 and 2.
From what? Parak 1
They're
and 2.
so different from Parak 1 and 2.
Right. Anyway, the understanding that I have is that just a thought that Reb Shimon ben Yochai went through all the suffering. So what he's really telling people is that when you go through suffering, look at my suffering, 13 years in a cave. I am able to exempt the whole world from suffering. So don't minimize the suffering you went through. You should know that it's a tremendous atonement. No one should ever feel that their suffering is for nothing. The suffering that we go through brings us to the highest levels. And so he's comforting a nation that's suffering from Roman decrees and exile. Reb Shimon ben Yochai was in that time when they were killing all the great rabbis and they were running after him. He had to escape for 13 years. So he's basically telling the people that the merits that I got from it could allow me to exempt the whole world from the day I was created until now. The whole world would be exempt. So don't ever let the suffering overwhelm you and think that it's for nothing. Now, so that maybe could be a little understanding, and that he was even reached to high levels on B'nai Aliyah. That because of my suffering, I reached this level of being exalted, and therefore, you never know what level you've reached because of your suffering. Just a thought. Anyway, we're gonna stop here. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.